Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our presentation today on mass casualty incident preparedness. My name is Kevin Riley, and I'm with the Emergency Management Department at Stony Brook University Hospital. Our presentation today is one in a series of case studies designed to enhance medical surge preparedness in hospitals, as well as in the pre-hospital setting. To that end, we're going to focus our panel discussion today on the amazing response to the Century 16 movie theater shooting, which took place in Aurora, Colorado on July 20th, 2012. This incident was the largest mass shooting in America up until that time. It's one that saw 82 people get injured, 70 theater goers were shot in the attack, and it's one in which sadly took the lives of 12 innocent victims. Just a couple of administrative notes before we introduce our panelists. I'd like to ensure that our audience members have their cameras turned off and their audio is on mute. That would be appreciated. Also, anyone wishing to have their attendance recorded for this session can do so. You just need to type your name and email address in the chat window, and we can record your attendance. We will have a question and answer opportunity towards the end of the session. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat during the question and answer period. You may be interested in knowing that this session will be recorded and it will be accessible on our regional training website come Friday morning. And at the end of the presentation, we'll provide the necessary link to access it. I would like to take this opportunity here to thank my associate, Bryce Stoker, who is joining us today, whose creativity was put to very good use during the creation of our slides, something I couldn't do on my own, for sure. I also want to thank our panelist, Farah Soudani, who was kind enough to provide us with many of the touching photographs that you're going to see during our discussion, including this one, which is a picture of the, Farah refers to them as her angels in blue, the members of the intrepid Aurora Police Department who responded to the scene that night. So thank you for the photographs, Farah, and thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
It's very, very meaningful. And along those lines, on a very personal note, I just want to say really what an honor it is to associate with our esteemed panelists today and with each and every one in our audience as well, of course. Many of you are probably aware of much of the incident, or much of the details of the incident that we're going to focus on today. But our goal is to take a deeper look into the event and learn about some of the lesser known details. So it's worth mentioning that this is not just going to be a retelling of what may have been reported in the media or what may have been read about in an after action report. Our goal today includes gaining personal insight from those who were actually there. And in doing so, we hope to also enhance personal and organizational preparedness by examining some of the key lessons learned. Okay, so we'll do our very best today to uncover whatever silver lining exists in the dark cloud of this cowardly attack, not the least of which is that every person who entered the hospital with a pulse that night left the hospital with a pulse. And this stunning outcome was only made possible by the swift, courageous, and unorthodox response at the theater, combined with the extraordinary talents of the many hospital care providers who quickly swung into action that night. And speaking of those amazing individuals, I'd like to say that we are just so very fortunate today to have with us some incredible individuals who truly rose to the occasion in the wake of the attack. By all objectives, our panelists are heroes, one and all. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our four panelists today. And I'm going to start off with Commander Jad Lanigan, who's commander of District 3 operations for the Aurora Police Department. I'd also like to introduce Farah Soudani, who was a theater goer that night and who has subsequently become an awareness and resilience advocate. We also have on the panel Dr. Camilla Sasson, MD. She's from the emergency department at University Hospital. There is a possibility that Dr. Sasson may not be able to join us today, so we'll give you an update on that later, but we can proceed on and just hope that she can join us at a later point. Otherwise, our fourth panelist, Daryl Johnson, who was an emergency medical technician at University Hospital, is going to have to speak on behalf of himself and Dr. Sasson. So sorry to put that kind of pressure on you, Daryl, but we have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. But welcome again to the panel, and thank you all for sharing your experiences with us today. So now let's talk about the event itself, and let's begin this journey just after midnight in Aurora, Colorado on July 20th, 2012. And our first question starts in the pre-hospital response phase, and it's for Commander Lanigan. Sir, in your position as the ranking law enforcement officer on scene, you were the incident commander that night, and as such, you had to quickly assess the size and scope of this very complex incident. You had to establish what the priorities were going to be and quickly provide some very definitive direction to your officers and to others. But most of all, I think you really had to improvise due to the fact that the response was probably turning out to be anything but a textbook response. So can you first describe for us your initial thoughts when you first arrived on scene and kind of when the enormity of this situation became apparent to you? And then I'll ask you to walk us through the sequence of events that occurred.
Sure, you betcha. So as he said, my name is Jad Lanigan. I was the incident commander that night for the theater shooting. At that time, I was a newly promoted lieutenant. I was on probation at the time as a 6-month probationary lieutenant. And I'll tell you, it wasn't until the wee hours of the morning that I finally realized what was going on. I was, if you look up here in the very left-hand corner of this top left-hand corner of the screen, I was up in that area when this call came out. And if you look at the S here on Sable Boulevard, just below that to the left a little bit is the movie theater. If you look up here to the top right part of your screen, just underneath that U, that is police headquarters. So you can see how close the two locations are and where I was at when this call started. Aurora at that time was experiencing some higher than normal crime, and we had a lot of officers working that night, specifically 126 on-duty officers at that night at 12:30 in the morning, which really played into how we were able to manage this call. When I got there, or when this call came out, it came out as just a shooting. And we learned a lot when we went over this in the backside of it, that it was much more than a shooting when the call was coming in, but it wasn't relayed to us in the field. And so really one of our biggest talking points is the need to include dispatch centers in active shooter training across America, because we found that most people that answer a 911 call are also the same people that dispatch the actual calls for the officers. Our department is much bigger. We have actual call takers. We have dispatchers for police and fire. And what we found is those call takers that were bringing those calls in, they didn't understand what was going on in the background, specifically the gunfire. And that gunfire was actually recorded on several of our 911 calls. Not to say that we would have responded any differently, but the tactics deployed when we went to the mall would have been much different. You see, this area of town, it's not uncommon to have a shooting at this mall or in and around maybe this movie theater. And that's how it came in, as just a shooting. It didn't come in with multiple gunshots being heard in the background. It didn't come in with multiple callers until we started getting into the call. So the key takeaway here is our dispatch centers, our medical side, our EMS side, our dispatchers, our EMS people at the hospitals. We all need to train better as a group when we're doing these type of trainings. And everybody needs to come to the table when we're doing these trainings, because we found out, if you leave out the most common denominator, which is just a 911 call taker, the information that was lost was huge. Most people don't realize, but the suspect in this, he actually started with what is now being worried about the most in law enforcement. It should be worried about the most across the country, is what we're calling complex coordinated attacks. And he planned a complex coordinated attack. Most people don't know that he booby-trapped his apartment and set a timer in his apartment to where we were actually supposed to be at his apartment when he went into the movie theater and started killing our citizens. If that would have happened and the apartment would have came down, it was designed to where first responders would have been inside, either police and or fire. And then you can imagine if a whole building came down, and that's what would have happened. This 3-story building would have literally just dropped, is the way he booby-trapped this. And if that would have happened, you can imagine every cop and firefighter in the metro area would have been 2.5 miles away at his apartment while he was at the theater wreaking havoc on our citizens. So that's one of the other really takeaways that we really have to start looking at with all of these active shooter incidents, is the fact that they're starting to look at these as complex coordinated attacks. And even if you look at the Vegas one, it was the same thing. He meant to shoot out first the gas tanks at McLaren Airport and blowing those up to start the attack that way. So we got to start thinking the bigger picture. But as I got into this, there was things that was being said on the radio that was being relayed to me that it was that sixth sense that started playing on me, where the hair on my arms started raising, the little bit of hair that I have left on the back of my head. I just got that feeling that something, this was bigger than what I was used to. And it's not uncommon in Aurora for us to run a shooting of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 victims at a single time. And when we got in there, and the way that this suspect pre-planned this, if he would have had knowledge a little bit more on his weaponry, it would have been so much worse. It wasn't until probably the wee hours of the morning, this happened at 0038, so 12:30 in the morning. It probably wasn't until 3 o'clock that I actually realized what was really going on. And really, we had everybody transported within the first 45 minutes. So all of those people with survivable gunshot wounds, they were put in police cars. They were transported to one of the 3 local trauma centers that are only about 1 mile to 2.5 miles away from the theater. And if it wasn't for the fact of we live in a metropolis where we have some great medical providers, we would have unfortunately lost several more of our people in that theater.
Yes, a lot to consider there for sure. And so you had 126 officers on scene. I guess that's because the swing shift was still on or coming off duty while the graveyard shift was coming on. So you had an abundance of officers, and I know that within a minute or so, you had 2 cars on scene, and then within 2 minutes, you had 6 cars, and then within 4 minutes, I think 14 or 16 cars. So you had an abundance of manpower. Did you feel like it was enough for your needs? 126, that sounds like a lot, but maybe it's not a lot when you have an attack of this size.
Well, and I'm just looking for a slide that I have. And I want to say within 5 minutes, I was asking for mutual aid. I was out of cars. So
Right.
it was within, I just got to figure out the exact one. It was within about 6 minutes that I realized that my 126 I was out of. And as I go across the country and I speak about this, and that's an unheard of amount of officers on at 12:30 in the morning.
It truly
Especially
is.
if you go to rural America anywhere, there's not probably 126 officers on it in the state in some places,
Right.
or in that county or in 3 or 4 counties. So really, it comes down to what are you going to do? You and your fellow officers that show up there, you've got a job and a task to do. And whether you have 6 or you have 3 or you have 126, you're going to have to figure out what to do, and you're going to have to figure out mass casualty transport, and you're going to have to figure out volunteer firefighters and how they're going to be deployed. And unfortunately, as I tell people, this is coming to and I hate to use theater, but a theater near you where people are planning something worse than Vegas as we speak.
I
The
couldn't
mass
agree more.
casualty- Yeah, the mass casualty shootings, they're not going to stop. For
Right.
whatever reason, this
Right.
phenomenon just keeps on going.
It's
So-
never going to go away.
We've got to figure out how to plan for, with 126 officers or 6 officers, what are you going to do? And in the law enforcement side of it, we've got really good at it. We know that if we have an active shooter situation, we have one of 3 things to do, and that is kill the suspect as quickly as possible,
Right.
barricade the suspect as quickly as possible, or push that suspect out of that scene so they stop inflicting harm on our citizens. Either one of those is a viable option for us. We will catch them later if they do flee. We will deal with them if they do barricade, and we'll follow up the investigation if we do end up having to kill them. But that's our only solution with these active shooters, is to stop that threat
Right.
as quickly as possible.
You mentioned some difficulties in communications, which seems to always be a common thing in any complex event. Fire and police in Aurora, they are in the same. The dispatchers now I'm talking about, they're in the same dispatch center. They're in the
Correct.
same communication center. So if they're in the same room, I'm just curious about what the challenge was. Could they not communicate across the room to one another?
Well, I don't know that the communication in the dispatch center was as much of a problem as the communication was in the field.
Right. Okay.
We had a lack that night of unified command, and some of that I take upon myself. Some of that I give some of it to the fire side. But we had a lack of unified command. Let's face it, nobody ever imagined that at the corner of Exposition and Sable Boulevard in Aurora, Colorado, we'd have one of the worst mass shootings at that time in U.S. history.
Right.
And to plan for that on paper is one thing. And I always tell people it's great to plan on paper, but it's never going to work the way you want it to. Luckily, we had planned a little bit about it, but at that time, it was still being discussed across the country of who's in charge of a scene like this. Is it police or is it fire?
Right.
And having the right amount of fire assets there, it was probably 6 minutes into it, I'm asking for 4 ambulances. Well, I didn't know I needed every ambulance in the metro area at the time. And there was some confusion at the time of what an incident commander, somebody like me, can I order up assets like that? Can I say I need 20 ambulances? Well, I found out I can't. In our city at that time, I couldn't make that. It had to go up my dispatch center, over to the fire dispatcher, and then down to the fire battalion chief.
Gotcha. Right.
Had to make that decision on whether or not we would send those assets. That has since been fixed.
Right.
And that's what needs to be talked about across the country is if you're inside of a venue and you see what mass casualty you might have, you as the incident commander, whether that's fire or police, you should be able to start ordering up the physical assets that you need in order to take care of the wounded that are inside of that venue.
Right. Right. So on our slide, I'm just showing where the staging area was at Exposition and Sable. That's where fire was setting up fire EMS. I know at some point you were requested that you wanted ambulances in the Dillard's parking lot, but you were having trouble getting ambulances, I know. So at some point you realized that you're going to have to transport a lot of these critical patients in your police cars. And I believe you transported some 26 or 27 critical patients very, very quickly. What was it that tipped the scales vis-a-vis patient transport? What was it where you finally said, all right, we got to use our cars. We're not getting ambulances?
So if you look at this, this comes down to resource management. And I'm not a big man. I'm about 6 foot. I weigh a little bit more than I should right now. And go back to that one, yeah. And how much can a man like me carry physically from one point to another? And I knew that down here at this bottom left-hand corner, I knew I had an ambulance down there because that's where one of our first victims made themselves notice to an off-duty officer that was working a paving job down Sable Boulevard here. So I knew that that's where my first victim was. And unfortunately, that radio message to the battalion chief, he kept on sending his assets to Exposition and Sable. And you can see the distance between the back door of that theater to Exposition and Sable. That's an awful long ways to get somebody. So I wanted an ambulance parked right behind, almost to where the S is on Sable here, maybe a little bit below that. I wanted ambulances there, and then I wanted them over here in that Dillard's lot where that other circle is, because I knew that ingress and egress, I could get my ambulances in and out, and I knew my officers could physically get people to those locations. Now, imagine when you're a big person, or maybe even not a big person, how much can you physically carry for police and or fire, with your bare hands? We didn't have, I asked for litters. That was a military term. We need to figure out a way across America that those body scoops, those victim transport mobilization things we can put into and we can move them. That never happened.
Right.
And it was about 15 minutes into it that one of our great leaders in this organization, a guy by the name of Steve Redfern, got a hold of me on the radio and said, hey, listen, at that time I was the boss. And he said, hey, I need permission to start putting these people in police cars and getting them to the hospital. And because he had a bunch of victims literally stacked up on the backside of this theater waiting for an ambulance to get there to transport them. At that time, the Aurora Police Department had no medical training. The last time I had medical training before this incident was in 1996 when I went through the academy. And, breath resuscitation was puff, puff, breath, puff, puff, breath, push. And that's totally changed now. So we didn't have any medical training at the time. And this amazing guy said, hey, listen, I'm not going to let these people die on the back of this theater, and asked for permission to start putting people in cars. So all the credit goes to that man. His name's Steve Redfern, and he's a great leader. He's a great man. And he made the decision to start putting these people in cars. All he asked for me is to give the permission to take the liability monkey off of his back. And that's what we decided to do that night. And as you can see across the country, and if you talk to people in ERs across the country, that's what they're saying is you've got to get these critically injured people to the hospital as quick as possible so that a doctor can can get their hands inside of them and fix the holes. There's a guy by the name of Kevin Menes, who was the treating doctor in Vegas, that he goes around the country specifically teaching, just get them to me in a hospital and I will save their life. So that's what we did that night.
Yes, indeed. And I've spoken with Dr. Menace before. He tells a very interesting story, that's for sure. So the concept of rescue task force, it sounds like from what I've read in the after action report that Aurora has adopted that, at least in part, if not in full. Am I right in that it's called a high risk extraction protocol? Is that now how police and fire are training to go in and get people out, at least out of the warm zone?
Yeah. So there's, yes, at that time we had what was called HREP, high risk extraction protocol, or we put it into place just after this. And again, we never imagined this coming to what we thought was a small police department of 700 people. And we've now upgraded that to the best common practice of ASHER. It's a fire institute, but it really is to determine how far we can get our medics into a scene to get our victims out of a scene. And there's still consternation across the country of how far medics will actually push in, because they're not armed, and many of the time they're volunteers, and oftentimes they don't have ballistic helmets or Kevlar vests. So rightfully so, they're cautious. So they want to know if they're going to go into what we consider a green zone, that's a safe zone, or a yellow zone, which is a moderately safe zone, and then a red zone, which is just not a safe zone. I'm here to tell you there's no safe zone in any of these. We can do our best to make it, but unfortunately, in these type of catastrophic incidents, it's a bad day to be a police officer or a firefighter. But that's what we're paid to do, is go in and save the lives of those victims in there that are simply just going about their life every day. Right.
It's a big paradigm shift to get EMS to consider going into a warm zone, and understandably so. It is an entirely different approach. However, I think the moral imperative here is that we can no longer afford to let people bleed out in the warm zone. We have to. We're in the risk. We're in the business of managing risk, and you mitigate it to the extent that you can, but you cannot let people bleed to death in the warm zone. And I have this conversation with people many times, and a lot of times they'll say, well, EMS operates in a cold zone. And I can quickly change their opinion if I personalize it and say, well, what if it's your family member that's bleeding out in the warm zone? And then all of a sudden the rescue task force becomes a pretty good idea. So if you personalize it, people are all for it. If you don't personalize it, some people are against it. It is a controversial issue, and it needs to not be taken lightly. People need to be trained and equipped properly. It's not something that you can just buff it and rush right in. You really need to know what you're doing. There needs to be a lot of training and such. So, well, thank you, sir, for such a compelling answer and such rare insight into how to manage an enormously challenging crisis. We're going to switch over to our next panelist. Our next question is for Farah. Farah, you were seated in the 12th row of the theater that night, and you were injured in the attack. But the telling of our story today doesn't really necessarily require us to, revisit the details and the severity of your injuries. But I do think it would be interesting, really, and very inspiring for an audience of emergency responders, if you could just recall for us your feelings when those heroic police officers, you call them your angels in blue, when they first showed up at your side in the theater to render aid. How did you feel at that moment?
I don't know if I have enough time to explain all that, but it was, to say that it was relief was a complete understatement. I could hear, with all the chaos and screaming and commotion for that minute and a half it was going on, I got used to those sounds, but then you can hear the sounds of the officers coming in. And I was thinking, oh, thank God. And then they came over to me. Gary Rivoli was the first officer who got to me. Don Hickox was the second. There's Gary. And he came over to me. He was trying to render aid because I became eviscerated. I was shot in the torso. My organs actually came out of my body. And I caught them and put them back in and lay down, which hopefully you don't ever have to hold your organs, but if you do, apparently you can risk bacteria. So just hold them, don't push them back in. But
Noted.
but honestly, I was just like, okay, I'm safe. The main threat is over. I mean, there's literally, your mind is going at 10,000 miles per hour at this point. They brought in a backboard. They had to roll me on my injured side to put me on the backboard because I was in between seats. They had no leverage to get me out, which that kind of hurt. But the funny part was, as they were taking me down the stairs, I look over and I see my nachos, and I got mad that they weren't grabbing my nachos. And then later I forgave, and it's like, okay, well, this situation was a little bit dire, so they can take my nachos. But they take me out, put me in the back of the theater, and I don't even know how many people were working on me. I think there was at least like 6 cops around me, and one of them, the poor thing, Gary, he was sitting there talking to me, and he was like, "What's your name?" I was like, "Farah." Goes, "Sarah?" "Farah." Like, he was purposely saying it wrong just to keep me talking. And this one officer was like, "Her organs are coming out. Her organs coming out." And Gary was like, "Shh, don't say that." I'm like, "It's already too late, bro. I know what's going on. It's okay." But I mean, for the extreme situation, for how fast everyone was working, even as, somebody who was injured and just sitting there, and I didn't have the strength to do anything except maybe talk a little bit, but watching everybody work around you in such, what's the word I'm looking for? With such flow, everyone.
Such harmony, maybe.
Yes, thank you. With such harmony, everyone did what they needed to do. No one questioned anything. If they're doing something and someone said, "Hey, do this," they went and did that. You can't plan for the kind of communication, even with the lack thereof, just how everybody worked together. It was absolutely amazing. And the best way I can describe it is beautiful and absolutely heroic. There's no way I can even put words on it. Like, I get teary-eyed and tongue-tied just talking about it.
Well, you pay a very wonderful tribute to your angels in blue just by being willing to talk about this. So it's very profound. It really is. We can't thank you enough for sharing your insight here. I'm showing the casualty collection points again up on the screen. Am I right in thinking that the driver of your car, he jumped the curb to get onto Sable? So were you at the casualty collection point up there to the right there, the one furthest to the right?
Jad, I was in the big oval area, wasn't I, at the bottom?
Yeah, she was brought out on the backside here where the long oval one is. There was only a few that were actually over there on that upper corner, or either one of those corners. Most everybody was in that back long oval area.
Gotcha. Okay. And Farah, this is Gary Rivoli. He was the first to come to your aid in the theater. Is that right?
Gary Rivoli, yeah.
Rivoli. Oh, I apologize.
No, you're okay. I called him Rivoli for like 3 years, so I got it right.
And Kevin, I gotta bring something up here. You asked me the question, when did you realize what was going on? And I was probably a good 15 minutes into this when they were getting Farah out of there. It could have almost been 20 minutes into this when they were getting Farah out of there. And I saw my officers, they had her on a backboard at the time. And if I could suggest anything in the medical field, you need to make those backboards this much smaller so it'll fit in the back of a police car.
Right.
That's my little thing.
We're not using them at all, actually, in most cases.
Yeah. But it wasn't until that I got inside and I saw the carnage inside and them actually treating Farah. Not one officer in there had a glove on. It wasn't about that. They had literally, they were helping Farah hold her organs in their hands.
Right.
And it wasn't until I saw that I realized the enormity of what we were dealing with. And it, in my mind, seeing all this, it still didn't make sense that this is one of those active shooter incidents that, you know, we've studied and we've gone to school for.
Right.
It wasn't until probably a good 1:15, 2 o'clock in the morning that I realized, holy shit, this is really happening. And after seeing, you know, what Farah was going through, yeah, I got to give all the credit to that young lady. She kept it together that night.
Indeed, and did so without any nachos.
And no nachos.
But honestly, I just want to say really quick. So one of the stories I ever tell, so I told you this, Kevin, and I'm pretty sure Jad and Daryl have heard this before. I definitely want to give, I mean, with every doctor and every first responder, they get 99% of the credit of everything that happened and the reason why I'm alive. But I do want to give that 1% credit because a few months before the theater shooting actually happened, I watched the movie about Bethany Hamilton. And she's a girl who was 13 years old and got her arm bitten off by a shark.
Right. Okay.
And in the movie, her character, you know, when they're telling her story, she is saying, I mean, she's in shock, but she's staying calm. She's not freaking out or anything. She's just trying to stay calm, asking for her mom. And it kept her from bleeding out. And so the moment I realized I was injured, I literally said, oh my God, I need to be like Bethany. And that's when I literally pushed my organs back in and I laid down and I tried to keep my blood pressure down as much as I could. So if anyone says a story or anything, definitely give her credit.
Yes. Well, you rendered self-aid, and that obviously made part of the difference anyway, for sure. So I've heard other people say, other people who've been injured in attacks, that, you know, just because you're shot, it doesn't mean you're going to die. You don't give up. I know the pastor in Sutherland Springs, Texas, was shot 8 times and he survived. And I know of another police officer who was once shot about 15 times, and he is still alive today too. So people should remember that just because you're shot does not mean you're going to die. So they should do what you did, Farah. You know, try to remain calm, try to keep your wits about you, and that will go a long way towards a good outcome for sure. So Farah, very quickly. So when the officers arrived on scene, obviously that gave you a lot of hope, but certainly when you arrived at the hospital, and you're suddenly surrounded by a lot of very extraordinary caregivers, that had to be very encouraging as well. What were your feelings when you were suddenly surrounded by your angels in scrubs in the ambulance bay? That must have given you a lot of hope, I would imagine.
It did. I mean, I felt just that enormous sense of relief once I saw my angels in blue. And then when we were speeding down the street, driving to the hospital, I actually remember looking outside and the sky was completely clear. And then, you know, we're making some turns and everything and we're slowing down. And I see the overhead of a building, you know, coming into the bay of that hospital. And even though I have organs coming out, part of my leg is filleted off, I was just like, it's going to be okay. And so when they got me out on the gurney, I remember I just laid there. And even as they wheeled me into the OR, and Chris McDowell, who was the officer who held me in the back of the cop car, I asked him not to leave me. And he didn't. He was right there walking right until they took me into OR. And that's when we said our piece. And then I met the lovely Daryl here, who is the face that I remember more than anything. And he and I still joke about the fact that he cut my bra off and he saw it was me a bra. So we joke about that, but honestly, they I think about them every single time. Every time I hear an ambulance, every time I hear a siren, I, say a little prayer to myself, like, I hope they're okay. And when I say them, not only the people who the cops are going towards, but I also pray for our officers, because they walk out that door knowing they may never come back, and they are my angels. They always will be.
Again, that
Oh,
is,
sorry.
no, that's, those are beautiful tears and a wonderful tribute to the heroes who saved your life. It's really very, very heartwarming. It's really part of the reason why we're even doing this interview. We're trying to make this about resilience and hope, and your tears actually add a lot to this, because they're genuine, and it's a tribute to your heroes. So maybe you can forgive the police about the nachos, and you can forgive Daryl about the bra. And
I guess, it's like not like they saved me or anything.
right, exactly. Well, thank you, Farah. Thank you so much for allowing us to gain really such fascinating and intimate insight, from the point of view of a patient. I don't want to call you a victim. I want to call you a patient, because to use the word victim almost pays tribute to the shooter, and I never want to do that. You were a patient, not a victim, and so
She's a survivor.
survivor,
Yeah.
a survivor, that's for sure. And what a privilege to hear your story. Amazing.
Thank you.
So we're going to move things along and take this into the hospital setting now. So Dr. Sasson can't make it today for the very good reason that she's tending to patients right now, which is far more important. So Daryl, I'm going to try to combine the questions I was going to ask her with the questions that I'm going to ask you. And I think they're general enough that you can probably field them. A response of this magnitude is going to be difficult, even when all the right pieces are in place. So, and if I'm right, your hospital was on diversion that night, so everybody was already busy, and you probably had few beds available, and you also had the complication of very little advance notice of the tidal wave that was coming your way. So at around 1 p.m., I'm sorry, 1 a.m., a police car shows up in the ambulance bay with a critical gunshot wound victim, and then another police car, and then another, and yet another. So you very suddenly have a very challenging situation on your hands. Can you just walk us through the emergency department's response? How did you all bring cohesion to the chaos? Talk to us about, did you have to augment the staff? How did you do triage? How did you free up beds? Those kinds of things.
So it was crazy. Just like Commander said, that night was a weird night in terms of a lot of crime was happening prior to the shooting happening in the city of Aurora. We had, I want to say, 12 GSWs prior to the shooting.
That same night?
Yeah, that same night. It was a busy night. Like, we had went through all of our chest tube trays, all of our thoracotomy trays, and it was just a busy night. So I remember trying to walk away and grab some coffee or something from the cafeteria, and Dr. Sasson actually stopped me and was like, just stick around. I'm not sure what's going on, but there's a lot of chaos over the radio. So by the time I made it from the door to leave the ER department back into the main part of the hospital, or the ER by the charge desk, the little short person who was in that picture that you showed with the cop cars in the ambulance bay, her name is Becky Davis. She was our charge nurse on that night. And Becky was already out in the ambulance bay, her and Dr. Sasson, and they were doing triage. We were down 8 nurses in the ER that night. Myself and 2 other paramedics were on in the ER that night with a CNA. So we were already short-staffed, holding 34 inpatients we had in total 42 ER beds, and more than half of them were already consumed with inpatients who should have been upstairs, but no room due to capacity. So we didn't know what was going on at all. I didn't know what was going on until the next day, actually, to be honest with you. Like, went home, went to bed, and woke up and found out there was a shooting, a mass shooting. I just saw a lot of patients, and I was like, oh, here we go.
Wow.
I had went back into like the other part of the ER where they were holding all the inpatients, and there were nurses from upstairs coming down to grab patients, and we made hall beds in the inpatient setting, and they just took patients. I didn't know that they had done that up until I went back there to go grab supplies. Yeah, and we needed suction, so I went and found crash carts all over. I kind of had to shift from patient care for a good 15 to 20 minutes to just supply and command, and that was my only job for about 15 minutes, is just gathering things that we needed. I called the ICU charge nurses down. They came with RSI medications and supplies to place chest tubes to intubate, because we had depleted our department prior to that with all that was going on. And yeah, it's yeah, that's something that I remember vividly. And then I come back through to the main part of the ER, and I see doctors who I had never seen before, taking care of trauma patients, and I was just like, okay, this is gonna be fun.
Wow.
How may I assist you? And that became my like biggest focus. Farah and a few of the other patients were my first patients who I took care of that night. And then after that point, I had just become, what do you need? How can I help? Making sure that they had what they need in terms of medications. And Dr. Sasson and the other doc who was on in terms of attending doctors were actually both second on-call providers to come in. The other two doctors who were supposed to work overnight called off prior to this happening. So they were both called in. And I remember, I was like, man, what a day to get called in.
Yeah.
Yeah, for both Dr. Sasson and Dr. Block. They both came in, and I just remember the residents who we had that day. I was happy that we had those people who were on. They were all senior residents, so pretty good at what they did. I remember the intern who we had that day. It was her first day as an intern, and I remember her tapping me.
Heck of a first day.
Yeah, I was just like, okay. She tapped me as I'm trying to drop an IV and Farah, and it's just like, hey, Daryl, this guy's heart rate just dropped. It's like, does he have a pulse? She's like, yeah. I was like, all right. So I popped the crash cart, hand her thing of atropine. I was like, you give this as fast or as slow as you feel is necessary. I'm right here. Give me 2 seconds, and I will be right over here to help you. And Farah, yeah. So I'm doing an IV after I cut her clothes off, her bra. Sorry, not sorry.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends who was also caring for her, his name is Ryan. He was trying to drop an NG tube on Farah at that time. And she was wide awake, silent, didn't say much, but she reached over and she gave him a nice tug and squeeze to his testicles. Yeah, and then we realized that she was wide awake in an active patient, and yeah, we we helped her relax a lot at that point in time.
Well, I think it's a understandable reaction given the circumstances.
Sure.
So
she didn't yell or scream.
So Farah was one of your patient encounters, and it sounded like it was pretty early in the process. And I was going to ask Dr. Sasson to spend a minute walking us through the process that a critical patient undergoes on their way to the emergency room. Farah, I can only imagine that with your injuries, they were going to get you to the operating room probably as quickly as possible. So I can ask you both this question about a patient experience. A critical patient who needs to go to the OR, how much time do they spend in the emergency department, and what kind of process, or what kind of treatment rather, do they undergo? I imagine they're not there very long before they're turned over to a surgical team.
Correct. So on average, with a single patient who comes in via EMS, they're coming in emergent. The entire trauma team is there for that one patient. And typically at nighttime, well, and back then we had 2 trauma teams in house at all times, just in case. And normally they spend anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes in the emergency department, and in that time frame, that's X-rays, that's CAT scans, labs, blood, and en route to the OR. We had 23 of those patients in our emergency department at that one time.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah. Farah, and all of a sudden there were 6 OR teams available. Farah and the more critical, more acute patients all made it to the OR within a 15 to 20 minute time frame. Yeah, we had several teams just transporting. There were just trails of blood and product everywhere, and body parts and flesh, literally everywhere. And I just remember us getting to the second floor. The ICU charge nurses came down from all of our ICUs in the hospital, and they were transporting patients to the OR and or ICUs, and their teams were doing surgical procedures bedside and in the ICU and ER and in our ambulance.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and just because, I mean, typically at 1 a.m. there's not a lot of people in house, so calling people in, getting them in the hospital is another issue, because concerns for safety become the highest priority. A lot of us in the ER did not know what was going on, so we're like, where's our help at? Yeah, learned that night that our paging system went down, so they couldn't page in extra help for the emergency department. So yeah, so staff who came in just so happened to be up, and they were watching the news and or listening to the radio and knew that what was going on.
A lot of them came in on their own, I would imagine.
Correct. Yeah, on their own.
So you at some point, not too far into it, you it sounds like you had a labor pool that was pretty big to handle
Correct.
this. Your no one died in your hospital, no one died in your emergency department, nor in the OR.
Correct.
So that is a pretty extraordinary story, and it's amazing that you got to experience these challenges firsthand.
For
And
sure.
it sounds like they had you hopping. It sounds like you were pretty busy.
Yeah.
And Farah, given your injuries, I imagine during the triage process, you were probably one of the first to enter the operating room. I would imagine, but by the same token, you're dealing probably with a large number of critical patients, so that had to be, the triage process had to be very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you very much, Daryl, for really giving us some valuable understanding of the challenges in an emergency department, especially from an EMT's perspective. That's very interesting. Not all jurisdictions have EMTs in emergency departments, so
Correct.
you have the unique vantage point of really knowing pre-hospital care as well as hospital care.
Correct.
And sounds like you did a pretty good job that night there, Daryl.
Really quick, if I could just say, I'm so sorry.
Sure.
Just for medical personnel or even any kind of first responder, no matter how injured the patient is, watch their hand placement when trying to intubate them.
Yeah.
Because they can be a little grabby.
Scene safety.
That sounds like very, very good advice. Very good advice. We're covering a wide array of topics today, that's for sure. And that's good. So, all right. Well, thanks again for that's the first round of questions. Then we're just going to switch it over now, switch it up a little bit. And I just want to touch upon some maybe some best practices, maybe some lessons learned in the aftermath. And we'll start again with you, Commander Lanigan. Based upon the events of that day, can you share with us just one or two, best practices for being able to improvise solutions, adapt to changes, overcome, in a crisis environment? How do you keep your wits about you in the midst of a raging storm? I think we can all really benefit from your insight.
Well, I think in law enforcement and public safety in general, and I use this analogy a lot, is, the police department is really the junk drawer of every city. And whatever comes into the front desk, comes into 911, comes into the city manager's office, comes in to whatever the mechanism is, the police department is generally there to first deal with it and triage whatever's going on. So we're adaptive to all of these different situations. What we can never be adaptive to is the emotional connection. Actually, I'll get to that one here in a minute too.
Sure.
The biggest thing that we must do across the country right now is start working better with our EMS counterparts, not with just our firemen, because we work with our fire people and our EMS people on a daily basis. We know them by name. Sometimes we even go out and drink with them. Not oftentimes we've probably even married a few. We get to that part very well, but what we a lot of times forget about is the EMS side inside the hospital, and we leave them out of our training. And it's such an important part for them to understand how we triage out in the field. Might not be the way they think we're triaging or the way they want us to triage. Let's face it, that night, I knew nothing about triage. I was a 6-month probationary lieutenant. I went to some of the ICS classes across the country. All I knew is I had a whole bunch of people with holes in their bodies. And I thought to myself that night, I don't want any one of them to be like the teacher was in Columbine, that just bled out and died. I didn't want that to happen on my watch. And B, I couldn't let any of these people die on my watch. So I didn't care what hospital they went to, right? And even when I do these across the country, God damn it, if this happened to my little girl, I want them to get the best care they can in a hospital, and I don't want them to die on the floor of a movie theater or wherever else. So I know it's a bad thing to think about with hospitals, that you'll overload them. But they're really freaking good at what they do in hospitals, and they'll overcome,
Yes,
just
they
like
are.
the cops and the firefighters do. If they have 15 people show up, they'll figure out how to deal with 15 people. They're very resilient, and they're very, very good. You talk to any doctor, ER doctor across the country, and they all say the same thing. Just get them to me. If you get them to me, I'll save them.
Right.
And they're amazing at what they do. So think about rural America. And I always say this, try to think about rural America where they have maybe one level 2 trauma center. What are they going to do? You can't just let people lay, out in a field on a big green or red or blue tarp and let them die, or let them get down to what Kevin Menace says is to the point of no return. We've got to get them to the medical people. So that's one of the biggest takeaways is for me is working with and training with not only your fire department, training better with your dispatch centers, training better with your EMS centers, understanding that the EMS centers, just like your position is in your facility, they've got them everywhere. They're OEMs. You've got your version of OEM in the hospital. We've got a version of OEM in the police department, in the city. We need to figure out and train better to work together for these mass casualty incidents.
Right.
And then the other part is, these cops and these firefighters, these EMS people, they're just human. And let's face it, this computer here, it's going to shut down. And I had several officers that just literally, they shut down on me last night. They couldn't form a sentence. They were so, their computer up here it went to a blue screen. And we've got to really pay attention to our staff now more than ever. with what's going on. You can only put so much in there, and eventually it just stops working. Doesn't mean they're a bad cop or a bad firefighter or a bad medic or a bad doctor. It just means that this is overwhelmed and something has to be rebooted. So the mental health care side of what cops, firefighters, EMS, doctors, they all do. And then to my girl down here, the mental health side of what happens after this. So often, we discharge these patients, and I got to see firsthand what Farah went through the years after this event and her spiral down. God, I look at her now, and her spiral back up is much faster than her down. But we got to think about stuff like that as well. We just can't discharge them. We got to discharge them with a lot of mental health. Otherwise, we'll be picking them up out of gutters just like we did Farah.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of forethought needs to go into these kinds of things. And as emergency responders, regardless of the discipline, we need to be willing to take ownership of our own readiness, take ownership of our organization's readiness, whether you're volunteer or professional. Even if you're a volunteer, you're still performing a semi-professional function, and you have to take ownership of that. And I think in your case, excuse me, you can't fear improvisation, because really it was your improvised decision-making that resulted in the photograph we have up on the screen right now, where Farah's getting a hug from Chris Farrell. Who am I right, Farah? Chris rode with you in the back seat of the car to the hospital.
Yeah, so like Jed said, they couldn't get the backboard in the back of the car, and they're
Right.
trying to put me in there, and there's a lot of commotion, but I just heard them say, it won't fit, we need someone back there with her. So Chris McDowell crawled in, and all I hear is everyone say sorry, and they flipped me off the backboard, took it out, and then we went. And his face is one of the faces I remember most that night, simply because of the car ride, and because he didn't have a mask on. He didn't have a gas mask on, so I was able to see his face. And he's the one who I asked him, I was like, please don't leave me. He goes, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you.
Right.
And this picture is actually, I want to say it was like 3 days later or something or so. And this is the first time I saw him. And it's the first officer I actually saw. And I just remember him saying, trying to say it without getting choked up so he can actually hear me speak. But he walked into the hospital room. Into that hospital room. Or no, actually, I'm in the one where we're with Obama. That's the ICU room. And I just see him come in the doorway, and all I did was I just reached my arms up, and we were there for I don't even know how long. It just didn't move, just hugged. And every time I see my guys, I just give them the biggest hugs.
Yeah. Well, those are richly deserved hugs. And Commander, let me just say to you, you strike me as a very professional, modest guy, but I really have to say that your command of the scene that night and your decisiveness and your ability to improvise and keep your wits about you, you really do. Allow me to just say that you really set the standard that people should aspire to. I mean, what you and your officers did, it just, I'm not trying to ingratiate myself upon you. I just want you to know that it does give me goosebumps, and it should give everyone goosebumps, because it was a miraculous effort. And Farah's alive today, sir, because of you and your officers.
Well, I appreciate that. And like I tell everybody, I had 126 men and women working that night that they really get all the credit. I was simply the coach on the sideline that called some audible plays.
Right.
But all the credit goes to the 126 that they knew how to clean out that junk drawer and did just an amazing job that night. So all the credit really goes to them.
And indeed, and we will get in a minute or two, we're going to get to the credit that is richly deserved by the hospital staff, Daryl and your team. We will certainly get to that in just a moment, because the pre-hospital care was amazing, and the hospital care was absolutely Fantastic. So moving on, we're going to send our next question back to Ms. Sudani. Farah, when we met on Zoom about a month ago, you shared with me a very wise saying from Bob Marley, and perhaps a lot of people know about it, but it's, you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. And it's a great phrase. You were introduced to the power of that phrase on that night, but you have obviously internalized those very powerful words, and you've made them part of your life. Perhaps these wise words are one of the things that gives you the courage to speak about a very difficult experience that you had, an experience really that many people who go through something that would understandably shrink away from it, but you don't. So can you just share with us the origins and the ingredients for having that kind of courage to talk about it, for displaying fortitude in a crisis, and during the long road to recovery as well. You've had to be courageous for a long time, and you've done an amazing thing. So I'll stop talking and let you share some thoughts with us.
Honestly, one of the biggest things that helped was having a sixth sense of humor. I mean,
Okay.
as awful as a situation can be, for some reason, whether we see it right then or not for another 10, 20 years, you never know what silver lining comes out of such a storm. And I know, so I hate the fact that so many people got hurt and so many of my loved ones got hurt, because at Red Robin, except with the exception of 2 people, everyone with that group, we've known each other for several years plus. Like, we were a very close group, still are for the most part. And if I had an advantage, because I think we were the largest group of people to be in the theater that night. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we were there for Alex's birthday. We had, in Aftermath, we didn't have 1 or 2 friends who we were with that we could rely on. We had a dozen people. We had a very large group.
Wow.
So honestly, that was vital for my road to recovery, mentally, more than anything. And like Jad said, I did spiral down. Several months after that, I started getting into drugs to numb the pain, because the mental aspect was starting to kick in. And then I quit the drugs, and then I was still emotionally distant. Healing was very ugly. And I got sober, and it was the most expensive lesson that I ever learned, but it was definitely worth it. And I don't always know why things happen, but for me, I've always wanted to help people. And
Well, that's obvious.
and it's so funny, because my mom and we butt heads like no other. And there's one thing I was never able to argue about with her. And it was I was invited to speak on a panel years ago for the American Psychology Association. And I was nervous and not sure if I wanted to talk. And my mom goes, "Farah, when you got hurt, what did you do?" I said, "I thought of Bethany." She goes, "There may be some day where you become someone's Bethany." And I just shut my mouth, and I did. And honestly, it's been extremely cathartic, because I mean, thankfully for myself, I am able to find the humor in it. I am the type to, truly appreciate life. We never truly appreciate life until we lose our own, or lose the life of one who we hold closest
Right.
to our
Yeah, it's
heart.
about perspective.
It is. And I am thankful that happened to me, because I would not be where I am today. And I wouldn't have what we call our BAT family, everyone who we got to know as survivors, as first responders, doctors, like, they're all my family. And I wouldn't have that family if it wasn't for this. And it's just keeping in contact with them has definitely been one of the most helpful. And like Jad said earlier about mental health, I didn't start going to therapy, I think for like 6 or 7 months after it happened. And I went through 3 different therapists to find somebody who I connect with.
Right.
And thankfully, and what I also wanted to say is, I don't care if you're a military, survivor, officer, nurse, doctor, everyone needs somebody to talk to. Everyone needs mental health in some time. And honestly, what really got me to open up and even cry about it was EMDR. It was the type of therapy, which was absolutely, it was a lifesaver. It was.
Well, that's really amazing. It is. It's you're a very strong person, and it sounds like you just keep on getting stronger. So thank you for sharing with our audience those inspiring and thought-provoking words. Pretty amazing. And I think we're going to circle back to that theme in just a minute. But I would like to bring Daryl back in to talk about maybe some best practices and lessons learned on the hospital end. And again, these are questions I was also going to run by Dr. Sasson, but I think you can handle them rather adeptly there, Daryl. Your emergency room, we touched upon this already. You treated 20 some odd patients, I believe 26, 27 patients. Nobody died. And this is a testament to your organization's, commitment to excellence. And it can only come about when an organization and the people in it are dedicated to detailed planning and rigorous training and realistic exercising. So I can only imagine that your hospital does a lot in that realm, the planning, the training, the exercising. Is it safe to say that?
It is, yeah. And we do a lot more now, just because so much is going on in the world. Yeah, so we do training constantly.
Yeah. And it's a hospital is a no-fail enterprise, and training and exercising and planning are indispensable. And I think Dr. Kevin Menes out in Vegas can attest to that as well, because I think when I talked to him, I think his emergency room got 215 gunshot wound victims in about 50 minutes. And so you really never know what's going to come through the door. So you need to be committed to excellence. You need to be flexible. And like we talked about before, people need to take ownership and not fear decision-making. So your hospital did an amazing job. Farah's here today, not only because of the police department in Aurora, but because of the spectacular and extraordinary job that you yourself did, and Dr. Sasson. And she's not here today, but you can extend to her our tremendous appreciation for what she did. And also, I know in doing my homework, Dr. Sasson, everyone should know this, has also done a lot over the last 15, 16 months with COVID. I've seen Dr. Sasson on CNN before. I know that she traveled here to New York, where I am, and she did an awful lot for COVID as well. So you are all included among the ranks of very extraordinary people. And like I said earlier, it's a privilege just to talk to all of you. So we'll wrap up with just maybe a couple of more thoughts, and then I'd like to go into some Q&A for anyone that might have a question in our audience. We are short on time, so I'll try to keep it moving along. But
may I say one thing real quick?
Oh, yes, please do.
From the hospital side, we haven't been able to say much, but we appreciate the Aurora Police Department for everything that they did that night, more than anyone will ever know. This is our community as well, and these are our patients. So people who work in healthcare should take ownership of their patients. So when they brought our patients to us, it was an honor to work that close with them. So this is something that we've talked about for years.
Yeah.
These patients wouldn't be here today,
Yeah, there's a it sounds like there's a lot of trust there between the first responder world and the hospital world. Your hospital is actually further away, I believe,
Correct.
than the medical center of Aurora, and you handled the majority of the patients, so that shows a lot of trust in your organization. I mean, the medical center of Aurora did a spectacular job as well.
That's right. Correct.
So in fact, I believe 5 hospitals took patients that night, and they all did a great job. So let me just acknowledge all the amazing responders in Aurora. Pretty amazing city. I was out there a couple of years ago and really enjoyed myself. So the citizens of Aurora are in very good hands. I can say that. So.
Well, and I'll throw a little kudos out there too. That night, I had a guy by the name of Paul Giroth that was working for me. He's a SWAT medic. He's part of our TIMS program. He's now a SWAT supervisor. And that night, he was just working a patrol car, and he actually found himself inside the theater. And he knowing what he knew about being a medic in the medical field, he knew what he could throw on the university and they could handle. He knew what he could throw on Children's Hospital. He knew what he could throw on South Hospital. And, in there, he was putting little tick marks on his glove to make sure that he evenly overloaded all the hospitals. So a lot of credit goes out to that man also. Paul Giroth, he's an amazing guy. He's an amazing cop. And a lot of the credit for patient management goes to him as well. So I got to throw that kudo out to him.
I'm glad you did that. And just to be clear here now, he alone conducted the triage inside the theater. Is that right? He was the lone medical provider. He was a law enforcement officer, but am I right in thinking he was the only certified medical provider to conduct triage within the theater?
Correct. That is correct.
And I just cannot possibly imagine the enormity of the task that he had that night. And he did a really great job. He really did. So just one amazing story after another. So I'm going to throw a quick question out and we're not going to go in any particular order. Any one of you can answer this. And we've already kind of touched on it already, but it has to do with the emotional component of crisis response and the road to recovery. Physical recovery is mostly a question of biology or physiology, but the emotional recovery for victims and for caregivers and for law enforcement officers can be longer and complicated. So would any of you care to just share a strategy or two or a technique for, emotional health in the wake of a traumatic event? And I know we've touched upon it already, but any closing arguments with that topic?
Well, I would like to say, because I know these two right here on this panel with me did the same thing I did, and they didn't think about their mental health first. Because they're in a position like, hey, you see this every day, or you're trained to do this. You don't need therapy. No.
Right.
Just for everyone, push your ego aside. And if you end up not needing therapy, then great. That's amazing.
Right.
But majority of the time, people do on some level.
Right.
Whether it be about that situation or if that situation brought up something that you're repressing from your childhood, for all you know.
Mm-hmm.
Just let yourself heal and let yourself feel.
Yeah, that's great. And that applies, of course, to the patients, the first responders, the medical care providers.
Everybody, even people doing dispatch, they deserve it too.
You're exactly right.
And
And
I also really quick would like to thank dispatch callers and everyone else behind the scenes, to all the way down to the medical personnel who clean up the operating rooms when doctors are done. Every single person is vital and every single person is important. And just remember, as much as, being in the hospital field or medical field, being a police officer, our personalities are to take care of other people. You can't forget to take care of yourself.
Right. Very, very wise words for sure. You can't do it alone, and you can't set it aside. You can't ignore it. take it on and take care of yourself and take care of others. So those are very wise words.
And don't be afraid.
Well-
the healing is ugly. Healing is ugly. Let it be ugly.
Yeah, yeah.
And Kevin, I'll tell you, of the 126 men and women that I had helping run this call that night, I've as an agency, we've probably lost almost half of those people to other professions now. It took about 5 years for people to start realizing some of the trauma to start coming out. It took me personally probably 8 months to start dealing with the trauma that I was holding in. I was trying to be that good supervisor, taking care of my people, wasn't paying attention to myself. Actually had a night terror one night and began choking my wife in that night terror. And if it wasn't for her resilience on getting me off of her, I might have killed her that night. So that was my wake up call that, I really needed some help also, and started into some therapy for myself to try to work through all the trauma of seeing what I saw, managing what we managed, the media press, dealing with our survivors. It all culminated in a couple of nights, and it brought me down to my core and my family's core. So I'm a big believer in psych services, mental health, peer support.
Right.
I think every agency, every hospital, we should all have something like that people can lean on. I also believe, like Ferris said, we're just humans, and
Right,
we got to
right.
get past that thought process that no, you're a cop first, and you should be able to deal with this. And a lot of times, society does. They think that we're these super beings, that we can magically put handcuffs on people, and people will magically just do what we tell them to do. And when you look at most cops, we go home and we're moms and dads and grandmas, sometimes grandpas.
Right.
We don't have many great grandpas out there or great grandmas, but we're just human, and I'm no super being. And most people just need to realize that we do the best job we can. Sometimes we fall, sometimes we need some help. But as you see your men and women in uniform across America today, now more than ever, they need a hug. They need to be told they're doing a good job, and they need to know they're supported.
Right, right. Our noble obligation is not perfection. It's simply just doing the very best you can and taking care of yourself. And that applies to everyone. Mental health and PTSD is a recurring theme that keeps coming up over and over again with everyone that I talk to. I think it would make an excellent future presentation to make, because everyone I speak to, it keeps coming up over and over again. And it's such a big piece. It's the piece that lasts the longest too. The response phase to these things is typically very short, but the recovery phase is usually very, very long and perhaps an underserved topic. So I'm very happy that you're all serving this topic today, because it needs to be addressed. So
from the hospital standpoint, at least at university then, and they realize this now, they did not do a lot in terms of supporting us. We kind of moved on like nothing happened for a while. And 2 weeks later, the exact same crew who was on for the shooting, we were all on for a big apartment fire right across from the shooter's apartment. Someone burned down the building, and we got all those patients, the exact same crew who was on the night of the shooting. That was a big trigger for a lot of us.
Sure.
To have a mass influx of patients coming in. It was it was unsettling. It was nerve-wracking. Like, oh man, here we go. We're at capacity. So in my mind to this day, when we're at capacity, which is baseline now because everyone's at capacity nationwide because of COVID and just sick patients, it's a big trigger for several of us.
Right.
I'm one of few who still work at University Hospital and or who still works in the emergency department. I'm not full time in that capacity anymore, but I still pick up shifts as a paramedic.
How long have you worked in a hospital, Darryl?
I've been at university for 12 years this October, and I've been in healthcare, pre-hospital and hospital for 19 years now.
Wow, God bless. There's probably not much you haven't seen or done. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah. And I was one of those people. I did not. I had the mindset of, this is your job. This is what you're trained to do. Buck up. Stop crying.
Right.
Go back to work. And I did that for a long time until I had a breakdown from depression and PTSD.
Yeah.
I made the switch from taking care of adults to just pediatrics, which was
right.
even it was even worse. Yeah, I wanted to kill myself. I was depressed to the point where I was placed on a mental health hold.
Yeah,
cared for by my friends and peers and colleagues. So I was embarrassed to be in that bed. Oh man, there was so many little.
I think that maybe admitting weakness is really the better part of courage, is it not?
Correct. Facts. Yeah, and no one treated me any different. I'm a very particular person. I'm OCD. I am very neat, and they would all come in my room and like mess with stuff on purpose. And I'm like, yeah, but they didn't change their personalities.
Right. Well, you all have a willingness to share your experiences, and it's really pretty incredible. So you're living proof, actually. I think is it fair to say that recovery is possible? I mean, you're all here today. You have smiles on your face, and you can recall difficult times, but you do so in a sort of encouraging manner that I think people can learn that you can recover. It's a difficult road. Don't kid yourself, but you'll get to the end of that road, and you can recover, because I hear it in your voices, and it's pretty inspiring stuff. So, well, that's great. I would like to see if we have any questions from our audience. We are nearing the end of our time, so I would like to see if we have any particular questions from our very patient audience. And we've covered a lot of ground, so maybe there may not be any questions. In the meantime, while anyone's thinking about questions, I would like to just put this slide up on the screen, because we really should never forget the 12 souls that were lost that night, and we should always remember them. And we should.
Can you say 13? Because Ashley Mosier, who was shot, she was pregnant. She actually went to the theater to celebrate her baby. So we say 13 lives were lost.
I will absolutely say 13, because that is a fact. It is 13 lives that were lost that night. And
just so everybody knows, that's not Kevin's fault. That was a slide that we used in the police department, and that got out somehow. So it is 13.
Okay. Well, we will all remember them. We should never forget. That's for sure. And I'm going to just go through a few more slides. Farah was kind enough to send me some really fantastic photos. So in the next minute or two, Farah, maybe you and we can narrate our way through these next few slides, and we'll keep an eye on the chat box to see if anyone has any questions. But you really did provide some amazing pictures, all sort of inspiring and happy, and a good story to tell. So this is obviously Darryl and Farah and some others. Is this in a hospital?
Yeah, that's at university.
It is at university. Okay.
Yeah. So remember how I said beware of your patients because they can get grabby?
Yes, I do remember.
I stayed in contact with. He kept coming to my hospital room. We made sure to always stay in contact. And I think it was like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 months later, I came in, and because like I always try to see my nurses and talk to them and keep in contact as we can. And actually the big slide where there's me with Camilla, Darryl, and these two and all the other ones one of the guys there. What does Ryan do now? Is he still an EMT?
He's a nurse. He now lives on the East Coast. He and his family just moved 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
But Daryl actually brought me into the hospital so I can meet the guy who I accidentally grabbed while he was trying to intubate me. And
He had it coming.
Yeah.
He
That's
should have made
funny.
sure that you were not responsive at that time.
well, it's so funny because I kept like wiggling my head, so he takes my chin and like pushes my head back so he can, and so I grabbed him, and he falls back, and the last thing I remember is him and Daryl saying, put her down now, she's still awake."
Yeah.
And then they did.
Well, you have to communicate at certain times, and you did what you had to do. So this is another great photograph of
So
Commander
this
Lanigan and
after-
Farah and Steve
I'm so sorry.
Redmond. No, please go right ahead, Farah. These are your pictures. You should do the narrating.
Well, part of when, Jad said he saw me spiraling down, this is actually just after the second anniversary. And the previous night, like I said, was the second anniversary was the first time I actually started to feel about the situation because I was just so emotionally numb. And I actually had drank too much, and we're at the theater anniversary. I'm throwing up in the street. One cop is holding me up. Another cop is feeding me water. Another cop has a towel under my face. I'm just like, this is bad. So this is the next day where I see Jad, and Jad is in the red, and Stephen Redfern, one of our other angels, is in green. And I was at the beer festival. Which beer festival was it called, Jad? Is it
That's the Alex Teves? Alex Teves was another gentleman that was killed in the theater. His parents started the Teves Foundation for No Notoriety.com. And this was an event for Alex Teves and his charity that he put together before he was killed that night. So
Gotcha.
it was an event for Alex and several of the other victims that lost their lives that night.
A meaningful event, no doubt about it.
Me and my lovely man.
So this is a rather fun photograph. Farah, how long were you in the hospital for?
I was in for 3 weeks. I was discharged for a few days and then readmitted for another week, so a month.
So 4 weeks of hospitalization followed by probably months of rehab. Would it fair to say?
Well, funny story. My stubborn and arrogant self at that time, I was like, there were some doctors who I'd spoken with who I didn't like their bedside manner. They made it seem like I was never going to walk again or walk straight or anything. I'm like,
That's all you needed was a challenge.
Yeah, just a little bit. So I actually never did physical therapy. I never did occupational therapy. I just would look up stuff online and some books, and I would do my own stretches and my own exercises, and I did it myself, which wasn't smart. I mean, I'm not a professional, but it mentally is what part of what kept me going. Like you said, was that challenge. You're not going to tell me I'm not going to succeed.
Right. Well, good for you. And here's another picture of you and Daryl. And
kind of like each other.
Yeah.
I know, I'm so bummed I don't have more pictures, but I've only had my current phone for a couple months, and I couldn't find my other phone to find pictures because
you sent me a tremendous amount of photographs, and these are really great to include in the presentation. They really are. This is Mr. Ted Ashby.
So Daryl, wasn't he the one that ended up intubating me after you guys put me out?
No, so he was the one who documented the entire event for everyone. He was like hid off in the corner, and he charted every patient's assessment, and yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So this was actually the last day of court, before the verdict was read, but the last day of court. So the guy in the orange is Wavoka. He was there with his 10-year-old son. The woman next to him is his wife. The two guys in the back on the right are Mike White Sr. and Jr., and they were with me and my group that night, and they both helped protect me and keep me alive. The little girl on the bottom in the red, Jasmine, she was part of my Red Robin group. It's her
Okay.
wife, her ex-wife, and a friend of ours is on the right. But and the guy in the middle was Alan, and he actually was in theater 8. And
Okay. Right.
he was an absolute sweetheart. And I just realized that my t-shirt says the best things in life hurt like hell.
Yeah.
So that's
Interesting.
irony for you. But yeah, and you can't see it in this picture, but there's actually a rainbow that formed right behind us when we took this, and we said that that's Alex showing us that he's there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Very nice. Very meaningful. You mentioned Theater 8, by the way. There were a couple of injuries in Theater 8. Were there not, Commander? Some of the bullets actually went into the adjoining theater.
Yeah, we had several victims in Theater 8, and which led to the confusion of how many shooters we thought we actually had.
Right.
And it was because of over-penetrating rounds from Theater 9 into Theater 8.
Right. And I guess we can all be thankful that the shooter didn't know how to operate guns very well, because I think he intended to do much more. Am I right?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
The
well,
main thing here is he wasn't stupid. He was smart.
yeah, he was
Really, he
calculating.
just wasn't smart enough.
Yep, exactly. So this photograph, Farah, includes the assistant district attorney. Is that right?
Yep, she's the blonde on the right, Lisa Tish McGuire, who we absolutely love, who was phenomenal for our case, along with George Brockler and all the FBI agents and everything. They did a terrific job. The blonde in the white shirt and the gentleman next to her, that's AJ Boyk's mother and brother. Teresa Hoover, and I feel awful, I can't remember his brother's name. And then next to me on the left is Jasmine, who was with me that night. And then her ex-wife, Angel, is on the right
Gotcha.
in the hat. That's me and
Okay.
Jazzy.
All right.
That was 2017 or 18. I can't remember. I think,
It's at one of the anniversary gatherings.
yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so this
This,
picture is from an anniversary night. Was actually taken by the gentleman, Alan, who was in Theater 8. He took this shot, and to me, that's hope. That is
Yeah.
my picture of hope.
yeah.
Is when I see those red and blue lights, I don't feel fear. I
Right.
feel hope. I feel our angels going out and doing what they do best.
It's knights in shining armor.
Yep.
So I thought this was a fascinating photograph. It was obviously a serious enough event to garner national attention, and I think President Obama did exactly the right thing by coming to visit all of you. I think that was a very fitting tribute to all of you, and I think
And it was very nice.
appropriate that he did that.
Yeah, he's very charming in person, by the way.
Yes, I can only imagine.
But yeah, I'm with my mom and dad and my mom's brother. And I'm not really one for politics. I don't like politicians, but when he came into the room, I was like, "Oh, hi, how's it going?"
Did you know he was coming?
I did. They actually took out my Daryl, help me.
Break two.
Yes. They actually took that out a couple hours before he got there. And actually, I felt really bad for him because my parents didn't tell me the extent of what happened, because I didn't know that Alex died or my friends got so injured.
Right.
And he found out I was with the Red Robin group. And he was like, "Oh, you're with Red Robin?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, I'm sorry about your friend." I was like, "What?" It's like, "Your friend Alex Sullivan, I'm sorry he didn't make it." And I just got really wide-eyed, and I looked at him and I looked at my parents, and I was just like, "What?" And I started crying and freaking out. And the poor guy, my dad said he just closes his eyes and just goes, "I just told her, didn't I?"
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
"Yeah, we didn't tell her yet." He was just like, "I'm so sorry." And of course, my parents were like, "It's fine. Shit happens." But
Yeah.
I kind of felt bad for him. I never saw him after that, but I wanted to say sorry for freaking out.
Yeah.
But
Well, just a sort of unfortunate circumstances. No harm meant there, of course, but I think he was trying to do the right thing, and
Well, I think after that, he was definitely very cautious about what he said to anyone he saw after
Yeah.
that, just in
Yeah.
case, because he genuinely just felt so bad.
Sure. Yeah. I
Um,
think it was genuine. I think you're right.
yeah, definitely. That's me just, oh, I was just gonna say, I'm just laying there because I was so weak. This was, I think, that following Sunday or Monday. Yeah, so it was just a couple days later. I just had no energy. So I'm like,
Well, all things considered, you actually look pretty good if that's just a few days after the event.
it was the tan. I had
Yeah,
my
I
stomach
guess
glow
it was.
going.
And the tan and the sassy attitude, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, like in the previous picture, I always make a face, and so I figured I have to be Farah and make a funny face. So
Gotcha. All
yeah.
right.
And this actually was in that following September, August or September. We went back to the theater for exposure therapy.
Uh-huh.
And Jad, I think that was one of the times I actually got to see you afterwards. Um,
True.
so it's kind of re-meeting Jad. They're also, you can't tell, but the shorter guy kind of in the middle is Justin Grizzle, who he transported 4 or 5 patients,
Wow.
six
6.
to the hospital. And like he said that his car, the weight of the blood was rocking his car back and forth. There was just so much blood in his back seat. He saved Caleb Medley. I can't remember which other ones he was involved with. The big bald guy, is it Campang? Am I saying it
Compania.
right? Yeah, we call him Bullwinkle. But he was there too, and he was super sweet. He actually carried out Jasmine, who is the little one in the black t-shirt in the back.
Okay.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, and then there are a couple of us are survivors, a couple of them are family members, and it was just really awesome meeting these guys. And what's so funny is we went into the theater after this and we were like detectives. Okay, I was sitting here, this person was sitting here. I think they took me out this way. Like it was very helpful to have that exposure therapy.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, these are amazing photographs. I can't thank you enough for sharing them with us all. And so I'm as we wrap it up here, I'm just going to take one more peek at the chat to see if we have any questions. And I've taken a lot of your time today. In fact, I've taken a lot of your time over the last couple of months, ever since my first call to Commander Lanigan back in May. And I actually should share a funny story here very quickly, if you'll all indulge me, because I had seen you speak at the Alert Conference in Aurora a couple of years ago. And Farah, I know you were there too. I probably passed you in the hallway and didn't even know, but I thought your presentation was amazing. And I thought to myself, I've got to get a hold of this guy. I've got to talk to him and see if he'll be willing to do a presentation with me. But I had no idea how to get in touch with you. So I don't know if you noticed this, but in the email I sent to you, I put in about 10 different variations of what your email could possibly be. And I hope that one of them would hit. And later on that, yeah. So later on that night, it was a stroke of genius, if I may give myself some credit. I got home later that night and saw that one of the emails hit. So it was like, I drew an ace, and you helped me make this happen. And I appreciate you indulging me with all the emails and phone calls and meetings and everything. We're really at the end here, and I want to let everyone go, but I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I'm just not eloquent enough to come up with a way to say thank you to all of you. The words escape me, so I'm just going to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your courage and your insight and everything that you do. It's really pretty amazing to be able to associate with people like you. It's a privilege. So,
well, I appreciate the phone call. It's as I told you, I do about 15 presentations across the country every year. It's my cathartic way of talking about it. I think there's a lot to learn still in law enforcement, public safety, EMS. victim care that we can all just do a little bit better with. But unless we talk about it, we debrief it,
Right.
there's no way to really do any better. So
Right.
thanks for trying all the different emails. I appreciate it. If there's anybody else that, in your group that needs, I've got somebody across the country somewhere that can help with whatever. I'm going to do another medical one. It's funny, after you called, I had a guy out of Hartford Hospital in Connecticut that got a hold of me, and I'm going out to Hartford, Connecticut here in October to do 3 presentations out there to their cadre. So I do appreciate the phone calls, and I think it's a great thing to talk about.
Great. I can't agree with you more. And are any of you going to be at the Alert Conference in Nashville come October, November?
I won't. I've been told by my boss that I have a real job and that I got to start doing my real job a little bit too.
And we have to do what our bosses tell us. That's for sure.
We do.
Well, I'll be there. And let me just say thank you again. Let me thank the audience too for hanging in there. We ran long, but appreciate the audience. This is a recorded session, just so you all know. We're going to make it accessible on my website, and it will be viewed probably many, many, many times down the road. So this will be the gift that keeps on giving, and it's because of your generosity. Yeah, Farrah.
So sorry. Really quick, I just wanted to say, thank you for, asking me to be a part of this. I'm so honored, and like Jad said, it's so cathartic for the healing process. But I completely forgot to also say thank you for victims advocates, because they really helped us keep our shit together.
Yes.
While everything was going on, and they are absolutely wonderful as well. I didn't want to leave them out.
No, that's very good. That's very good. The mental health piece is such a big component, and they are the gatekeeper for emotional health. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. So
and thank you guys for having me be a part of this. I have a lot going on in my own life right now, so this was just a moment to stop and focus, and I'm not afraid to talk about it because for me this is very therapeutic as well. Just to talk. It was kept quiet for so long, so I'm not afraid to talk about it. So
yeah. Well, the best of luck to you, Daryl and Farrah and Jad. It's been a very inspiring presentation, and I wish you all the very best. And keep me in the Rolodex.
Definitely.
Now, Farrah, you may be too young to know what a Rolodex is, but we'll get to that later.
Hey, first off, don't be judging a book by its cover. Okay, I am as technologically challenged as my grandfather. So
Okay. Oh, actually,
I should have been born 80 years earlier. I don't get this social media world.
I get it. But listen, I almost forgot to get to our very last slide, which I have to show, which the quote and the picture kind of say it all. So this is how I wanted to end, and thank God I didn't forget to show the slide, because the simple but profound words from Bob Marley really matter in these kinds of things, and you're the epitome of that. So be well, and please stay safe always, and have a great day.
Too. And for everyone who's listening, just take care of each other and take care of yourselves. So
There you go. Those are great words to end by. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.